when you have children, you have to ensure that you always have coverage. Someone's always watching the kids, right? Doesn't go well when you leave it up to the dog. And so the other night, my husband says to me, he's like, I need to run an errand. I'm like, okay, I'm used to this. Kids are in bed, whatever. And he's like, well, I need to run to Hobby Lobby. Have you met my husband? I'm like, Hobby Lobby? Like, did you misspeak? Like, did you mean to say like Rural King? Or Tractor Supply, Lowe's, Harbor Freight, any of those? Those are the normal, like, you know, the auto parts store. No, Hobby Lobby. He's like, I need to check out their foam. That just got weird. I mean, it started weird, and then it got weird. And so I'm like, well, what's this about foam? And he's like, well, you know how I have to have tools for my new job. So John started a new job in January, and he's still kind of in the training element of it. You know, he's on a training schedule, and it's basically Sunday to Wednesday. And part of his requirements as an aircraft mechanic is to supply certain tools of his own. And so he had, you know, when he applied, he had to verify, I have all these tools. And he does, but there's this second piece once he started working. And they said, we need them to be shadowed. And I'm like, shadowed? What's that? And he's like, basically, they all need a place. They all need to have a home that is very visible and is kind of, you know, their little bed to lay down in. And so this is a picture of, you know, one of the toolboxes, drawers in it. You can see all the sockets in there. I brought another visual aid, and I'm like, okay, what's really the foam? Like, oh, it just keeps everything organized. He's like, that's part of it. But he's like, it also makes sure that I don't leave tools behind in an aircraft. It's an easy way to do a visual control. And he gave me this as my visual aid today, all these sockets. You can see all the shininess of it, and it all fits together in a nice case. I'm like, okay. But these don't come out very easy because it's new. He went shopping. But I'll put this up on the screen. For those of you might not see, there's a clear little red spot where one's missing. So when you're ready to close up what you're doing, you go, oh, that socket's missing. So hopefully you don't leave it behind and cause a problem later on. But it's just an interesting thing for me, and so, you know, why my husband wanted foam is because you can buy this stuff, but he can make it cheaper. Yeah, don't ask me how that's going. But a visual control is a huge gift at times, and we need control. I definitely want the mechanic working on my aircraft or my car to have sort of a checklist, to have some control, understanding of what they're doing, how they're doing it, and a process. And they found that this is really handy, not only visual controls, but also kind of checklists. And I love a checklist. I love a checklist, you know, just going through and having all things checked off. I mean, sometimes I make a task list, and I put things on there I've already done so I can check it off. It's just, it gives you this sense of like power and that I've done something. And a lot of times we do this, you know, yes, you know, in this situation for my husband, it's about safety, it's about efficiency. It's way easier to take a quick look at something like this and go, that's missing, as opposed to, okay, socket, and just run down the list. This is quick, makes sense. And control is really a good thing in a lot of circumstances. We appreciate people who have self-control, right? Especially when we're driving. We appreciate people who have kind of, you know, control of a classroom when they're teaching our children. And we use a lot of times this understanding to navigate our world. And there's all sorts of types of control. You know, there's kind of the physical control. And I'm learning that I'm losing that with my toddlers, that they are getting stronger every day, and I can't just kind of muscle them around as I need them to go someplace. But there's also kind of, you know, control with information. You know, if somebody's on a need-to-know information basis, or having information about things. And I kind of was thinking about this as we're entering into the season of Lent. in which sometimes we give up control. You know, a lot of times people would give up a thing that they enjoy, a luxury. A lot of people use chocolate or meat or fast from social media. You know, this need for control, and to say these things control me and I'm going to take away their control. And we attempt sometimes to exert power over these things. And that's a good thing, but it can also be challenging because we do not have control over all things. We do not have power over all things. And sometimes we don't really take that into account. We try to, or attempt to, have control over everything in our lives. We plan out everything. We anticipate every problem. We try to have complete and utter control. And that can be a problem for a number of reasons. First off, it's exhausting. It is exhausting to keep track of everything and to keep everything in its place. 2, it leaves no room for surprises. And if you've been alive for more than 5 minutes, you know that surprises happen. Because there are things that are beyond our control, and there are people that are beyond our control. And you know who I'm talking about if you're a parent, or if you've ever taught a class. There are people that we just simply cannot completely control as much as we would like to at times, for their own benefit, of course. And most importantly, why it is a problem for us to try and exert control over every aspect of our lives is that it's not our place. We are not God. We are not all powerful, so thus we do not have control over everything. We are not all knowing, so it's probably not a good thing for us to even think that we have control over everything in our lives. We are limited. We are limited beings. We have limited power, thus we have limited control. But often we try to assert control in places where we have no business doing that. Places where we think we have all the answers, and that becomes a real problem in our faith. Because again, it leaves no room for surprises, it's exhausting, and it's not our place. See, in our faith, we need to understand who God is, his nature, his character. We seek to know the person of Christ. Those are good things. That's an attempt sometimes in knowing that we can sometimes feel that we're in control. But sometimes we get so caught up in what we know about God that we become in love with our knowledge, not the Creator who we seek to know. And the feeling sometimes is that if we know more about God, we have more ability to control God, right? If I have all the secrets, this is why people dig into Revelation. They dig into it like, oh, I will have all the answers. I will know when the end times are coming. No, you won't. Just give it up. It's exhausting. Read it if you want to. Enjoy it. Learn from it. But most often, it is speaking to how we're going to live our lives today, not about how you're going to control the end times. Anyway, that's just a little soapbox I get on. But we crave control sometimes. That's part of our sin nature. And it's just sometimes even, we either seek to have all that knowledge, or we just get so complacent in our faith. We get so settled that we no longer need to be surprised, right? A surprise is just, that's too much work. We're much like a married couple who have settled into their rituals of the lives that they lead rather than the richness of relationship that they could have together. And I want us to dig today into a passage that comes to us from Matthew's Gospel. It's Matthew 17, verses 1 through 8. If you have your Bible with you, if you have it on your phone, on an app, or with you today, I invite you to turn there. I'm going to read it for us as we kind of walk through it. But this is a part where Jesus and 3 of his closest disciples are going to have an experience. And it's a passage that shows us what it is to be surprised by the power, the love, and the beauty of God. And so Jesus has come to a mountaintop. He's gone up to a mountaintop with 3 of his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John. They've come to the top of this mountain, and there's something going to happen here. Jesus, in front of them, let me read this for us from Matthew's Gospel. He was transformed in front of them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. So Jesus is almost illuminated or shining. I mean, this is not normal. I mean, this is what Matthew is writing to us about, that this experience that James, John, and Peter have on this mountaintop with Jesus. And the word that Matthew uses, metamorpho, is actually indicating that God is behind this transformation. There's kind of an interesting understanding here. And this stunning sight comes before the 3 disciples. And then it gets weird, if it wasn't weird to begin with. Because 2 dead dudes show up. 2 guys who should have been long gone, Moses and Elijah. And they appear, and they're talking to Jesus. And so you can imagine just the disciples are going, what is going on? Like, Jesus is lit up like a lightning bug, and Moses and Elijah, these titans of our faith, these guys who have been gone for centuries, are in front of us. They were both prophets. They were leaders in the faith, described in great detail in the Old Testament. Moses was the one who God used to rescue the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt. He is the one that God used to then give them the law. Elijah is this great prophet who is said to come again before the Messiah. So they've been looking for Elijah. So these 2 giants of the Hebrew faith are standing there with Jesus. And the interesting thing is that both Moses and Elijah had these moments with God on mountaintops in their own lives, where they saw the glory of God on a mountaintop. So there's this interesting point that Matthew is highlighting for us. And it's much like the glory that Peter, John, and James are now seeing. And so I want you to hear Peter's response to all of this. Peter reacted to all this by saying to Jesus, Lord, it's good that we're here. We're the first to see this. If you want, I will make 3 shrines. 1 for you, 1 for Moses, and 1 for Elijah. I'm going to build you each a little motel. No, sorry, got a little pokey there. But Peter's response to this event, though, to this miracle in many ways, is to build 3 shrines or shelters for what's happening. And it's the same word that is used for the word tabernacle. And now the tabernacle, I have a picture of it, that an artist has rendered of it, was this tent that it was actually a place that the Israelites carried with them through the wilderness. And they would set it up whenever they would have camp. And it was a place where, the Ark of the Covenant was held, but it was also a place of worship. It was symbolic of God's very presence with the people when they were encamped. And so this becomes their center of worship for the nomadic tribes when they're out in the wilderness during Moses' time. So it's interesting that Peter wants to build them each a tabernacle, much like the tabernacle that was in the wilderness. And what this always symbolized was God dwelling with the people, God's presence with them. And so Peter wants to do something I think that's well-intentioned in many ways. He wants to make some memorial fitting to them. He wants to capture this moment. We do this with our cameras. We do this with our phones all the time. We want to capture a moment so that we can always go back to it, so that we can always hold to it. Sometimes we do this with memories, and we retell them again and again. We do this in our families. We tell the stories that we love to retell. The mountaintop experience that happens. We want to relive it. We want to live in it in many ways. And sometimes I think we may just want to kind of contain that feeling of awe and wonder and control it. Now, Peter says this. Peter is saying this, hey, let me build you guys, 3 tents. A bright cloud appears and overshadowed them. So this story is getting even weirder as we go along, right? A bright cloud appears, which is an echo of the way that God appeared at different times, particularly as it's described in the book of Exodus, which is the story of Moses taking the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness. It's reminiscent of when God's presence appeared to Moses on Sinai mountain. It's how God's glory filled that tabernacle. It's how the cloud of God's presence led the Israelites through the wilderness. Interesting that this cloud now appears again. See, one of the things that our gospel authors do for us when they are telling us Jesus' story is that they are also, they're recounting from eyewitness memories, but they're also using specific words and images to tell the story and to point to other stories, to show the echoes of what's going on, echoes of previous stories that are told in the Bible, to help us understand the interconnectedness of God's story and how it branches and how it flows over the whole of the biblical collection. And I think that's just a beautiful thing for us to sit with a little bit as we enter into this story, that Matthew is using the language of tents or tabernacles to point to the wilderness experience of the Israelites, to point to the person of Moses, the giver of the law, to point to Elijah, who was this great prophet, incredibly faithful to God, who also brought a boy back to life, resurrection, and is the one who comes before the Messiah. As we see all of this coming together in this cloud, pointing us to then this declaration that a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I dearly love. I'm very pleased with him. Listen to him." You have this declaration from God about what's going on here. This is my son. I think Peter, James, and John were probably just enraptured by our teacher is in the midst of Moses and Elijah. And Moses and Elijah are probably like, no, this is the guy. This is the one we have always been pointing to. See, Jesus has fulfilled the law that is represented by Moses. He is the prophetic word represented by Elijah. He's made clear in this moment by God's declaration that he is superior to Moses and Elijah, whose revelations, whose own prophetic words pointed to Jesus. And this is humbling for Jesus' disciples. This causes them to drop to their very knees. They fall on their faces because this is nothing they have ever encountered in their life. And I love how Jesus responds to them. He tenderly touches them and tells them to get up. They've had this moment where they probably see the very divinity of Christ on display, and yet he gets very human with them at the same point to help them to their feet. Don't be afraid. I love that. I love this reassurance that he gives them, reassuring them that, yes, I am God's son, and I am the same teacher that you have known and you have followed. That even though you've experienced this stunning revelation here and now, I am still your teacher. This is a big moment for not only the disciples, but also the story that Matthew is telling us in his gospel. And I want us to kind of take a moment and jump back to Peter's reaction, because I think it is so very humble and so very human at times to do this. that when he has this desire to set up shop on the mountaintop, I think it is driven, yes, by his awe and his wonder, his desire to live in this moment. But I also think there's a piece of like, we can control this. We can hold on to this. This is an incredible moment that I never want to leave. And he goes back to what he knows and what he understands. Peter is a Jew. He has been raised on the stories of Moses and Elijah. He knows what the tabernacle means. He knows what it is to build what he calls a shrine that is also a tent. This is where you house God in a way. This is where you put God. This is the box God lives in, if you want to put it that way. This is Peter's attempt to understand God and this situation. And I can't fault him for it. We go back to what we know. He knows what tents and tabernacles are. This is where God meets with the people in the wilderness with Moses. This is what we do. It's worked before, right? It's worked before. Let's do it again. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it also leaves out the element of surprise and shuts us off from the imagination that God has given us and the imagination of God. See, relying on his knowledge, Peter may miss out on what God's communicating. Have you ever talked to somebody that you can tell is not really listening to you, but just waiting to give their response? And when you're talking to them, you can just see their eyes are kind of glazed over because they're more concerned with what's going to come out of their mouth than what's coming out of yours. And I think that's a little bit of Peter here. Because he's not truly listening or seeing what's going on here. He's not paying full attention because he's so wrapped up in everything that's going on and his need to control, to be in control. And so Peter misses what maybe God is trying to show him in this moment. Because this moment is bigger than Elijah. This is bigger than Moses. This is bigger than freeing the Israelites from slavery. This is bigger. This is different. And while this mountaintop echoes Moses' experiences with God on Sinai and Elijah's on Mount Horeb, this mountaintop also points to another hill to come. Golgotha, the place of the skull where Jesus will be crucified. On this mountain with Peter, James, and John, Jesus is revealed in glory, lit up, clothed in radiant white clothes, surrounded by two titans of the faith that everyone knew. But on the hill to come, Jesus is going to be revealed in shame, naked, bloody, abused, and on either side, two unnamed criminals. These are two different scenes that echo each other. And we need them both to see the glory in the cross and to see the cross in glory. To be surprised by the mountaintop in both. To be surprised by the unexpected power, love, and beauty of God, regardless of whatever mountain you're on with them. Especially if it is not what we expected or what we know or have experienced. Sometimes the biggest thing in our faith is, are we willing to trust God? Are we willing to trust God in the unexpected and the uncertain? Will we find assurance in listening to Him even if we don't have certainty? This is what we're invited into as followers of Christ. And as the community of Christ. As Church in the Mall, we have been on a wild journey together. We are an unconventional church in an unusual location for a church. There have been surprises and there have been setbacks. There have been mountaintops of both kinds at times. And today we're going to have an opportunity to talk about where we believe God is leading us in our next season. And in this, we want to listen. We want to listen to each other, knowing individually we don't have all the answers. It's giving up a little bit of control. But I believe when we listen to each other, really listen, we together have a better understanding of what it is to follow Jesus in this wild and precious life that we've been given. And it always starts with God's words. Because not only do we want to listen to each other, we also want to listen, most importantly, to God's voice. Listen to Jesus. Those are God's words spoken over him. This is my son. Listen to him. Listen to his words. Listen to his actions. See who he is and who he is in your life, the person of Christ. Listen to those words and listen to his very spirit that whispers to you. Allow yourselves to be open to his leading. Allow yourselves to be surprised by the power, love, and beauty of God. Even if it looks different than what you know or what you fully understand. This is hard for us. Because sometimes I think we feel like we're discarding what has come before. We're dismissing our history, when in fact we're building on it. There has been a lot of good work done here, and we want to build on it, not tear it down. But at the same time, some things may end so that new beginnings can come. That's how things work. That's how life works. And in all of it, we can be surprised by the power, the beauty, and love of God. That even when we don't fully know or fully understand, we can trust in him and to find the glory in the cross and the cross in glory. Amen.